Among the additions to the lore of S.T.A.L.K.E.R. brought by Heart of Chernobyl, the concept of subtle matter is one of the most crucial to the plot, as well as one of the most debated topics between fans. So, what's the fuss about? In this video, we will embark on a journey to investigate subtle matter and hopefully find some answers. Major spoilers ahead, so if you've not even heard of subtle matter yet, it's your last chance to click away. Otherwise, let's begin. First things first, we need to take a look at how subtle matter is presented in the game. During the storyline, we get our first glimpse at the topic after killing Faust at the Duga.
A mortal dies, yet the soul endures. Welcome to the subtle world.
Here we understand that this is some kind of hallucination, on which Faust has a lot of control to show Skif what he wants. However, this illusion does have consequences in the real world. Since Skif will die if he lets Faust drop him from the top of Duga. Then the preacher will peel off another layer from Skif's eyes.
The monolith showed me the zone for what it truly is.
Unfortunately, Faust will not elaborate on what the subtle world really is, leaving us to interpret it at our heart's content.
Is this the real zone? Define reality. The zone is what you consider it to be. I've shown you how I see it. Walk your own path, and you will come to see the zone in your own way.
In my opinion, what we see here are the so-called synapses, concentrations of anomalous energy that form the network of the noosphere, the Earth's informational field, which is deeply connected to subtle matter. The noosphere links the consciousnesses of all the sentient beings on the planet and stores their mental images. But it is actually much more than just an information field. Proof is that anomalies and other zone-related phenomena are a direct result of a breach in the noosphere, meaning that interactions in the informational field have very real physical consequences in the world. Anyway, the true introduction to subtle matter comes up a bit later, when Skif activates the visiograph in Malachite. Indeed, the device will display the image of the representative of sea consciousness, who explains that they survived within the noosphere even after S.T.A.L.K.E.R destroyed their physical bodies.
Thanks to the zone, sentient beings can achieve eternal life in the form of subtle matter, pure consciousness, free from the constraints and limitations of a physical body. However, should anyone attempt to harness the anomalous energy, it will inevitably result in the annihilation of all subtle matter.
Moreover, the representative revealed their plan to utilize subtle matter for bringing the Shining to the world.
After the reckless intervention by S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the structure of the noosphere was damaged, isolating individual subtle matter images from one another. The Shining will reinstate the right to immortality for all sentient beings in the zone, and eventually, for all of mankind. From then on, our liberated consciousnesses will gain the ability to communicate directly with one another, facilitating the free exchange of knowledge and experience. It will be the dawn of a new age. The Shining can rid us of the darkness that's holding us back, preventing us from hearing each other. It will grant us eternal life. No pain, no regret, no suffering.
According to this information, every individual in the zone has a so-called subtle matter image, stored within the noosphere. These images are preserved even after someone's death, ensuring the survival of one's consciousness. Moreover, It is implied that all these subtle matter images used to be able to interact with each other, but the failure of the second Caribbean experiment carried out by S.T.A.L.K.E.R resulted in the isolation of each subtle matter image. As far as I understand, this means that the consciousnesses of all the stalkers who have died in the zone since its birth are now trapped and alone, but more on that later. The goal of The Shining is not only to restore the links between all subtle matter images that currently exist, but also to expand the process to the whole world, allowing for an eternal life of cooperation within the noosphere for all of mankind. While this sounds wonderful at first glance, there is the possibility that the visiograph only displayed a psi illusion in order to trick people. If Darlin is present, he will make the following remark.
How can we be certain that you're a real living mind, and not some sort of program or copy of someone's memory?
It is interesting to point out that the representative will answer by calling Darlin by his first name, Dmitro. This is because the leader of Sea Consciousness is actually his father, Valentin Darlin. He points his son towards a device that can validate the existence of subtle matter, but does not have time to finish his sentence, leaving the trail cold for now. Later on, Skif will learn from Dr. Kaimanov that the device in question is the pod in Orbita. Also, Kaimanov will make his own comments on subtle matter.
It was a theory developed by Valentin Darlin, the leader of Sea Consciousness. According to his theory, subtle matter can preserve a reflection of a person's mind, their personality. If you're implying the representative is real, that means they actually succeeded.
The doctor then asked Skif to test out the theory at Orbita, though he'll need a special cartridge from the signature station to do so. We'll get back to the topic of the cartridge in just a bit. Anyway, Skif will retrieve that cartridge and use it in Lab X-15 under Orbita to activate the pod, then step inside in order to check out if subtle matter is real. While in the pod, he met with a Strider, who had died previously. The Noontider was confused at first, not understanding where he was and what was going on, but he seemed to quickly catch on after Skif pointed out that he is dead. It is possible that this state of confusion is related to the sudden connection with Skif after Strider's consciousness had been isolated in the noosphere ever since his death, but it might also be because he died while under the influence of the monolith. Indeed, since the last moments of his existence were spent as a monolithian, he wouldn't even remember them. In fact, the last thing that he can recall is what happened at X11 right before his brainwashing was restarted. That's why Skif relieved these moments from Strider's perspective when the connection was being established. Moreover, Strider was also able to share other memories of his past with Skif while in the pod, mainly the moment when his brainwashing was shut down back in 2012, during the military raid on the power plant. In the end, it is up to the player and Skif to decide whether or not this interaction proved anything about subtle matter. But before talking about that, there are a few more details I'd like to discuss. Firstly, it should be mentioned that Skif wasn't the only one who used the pod. Before him, S.T.A.L.K.E.R brought Ozerski to Orbita in order to convince him to use his status as the director of S.T.C. Malachite to provide help to Spark. While in the pod, Ozerski saw his old friend Topol, who was killed by the Ward many years ago. Their interaction was even recorded on a voice message, providing further evidence that subtle matter is more than a psi illusion. although it remains unclear how it was possible to capture a discussion that occurred within the noosphere with a simple sound recorder. Furthermore, we can wonder how S.T.A.L.K.E.R managed to activate the pod without knowing about the signature station. Perhaps he found another cartridge somewhere else, but it remains quite unclear how these devices actually work. We learn much later in the game that the people who connected to the noosphere via the pods in Lab X7 needed to capture their own Psi signature on a cartridge and put it in the system, something that Skif himself will have to do in one of the endings. Kaimanov also used one such cartridge to store his own memories, allowing Skif to live through them by using the Orbita pod. Therefore, it seems the cartridges are used to store the Psi signature of an individual, which are needed to establish connection with their subtle matter image within the noosphere. I like to think of the Psi signature as the coordinates of someone's synapse image within the informational field, but this is not 100% confirmed. With this in mind, how did S.T.A.L.K.E.R manage to get the Psi signature of Topol if he was already dead? The same question can be asked about Strider. How could the cartridge picked up by Skif contain his Psi signature if it spent years in Lab X3? Well, maybe it is called the signature station for a reason, and it was somehow able to pick it up remotely. It is also possible that there are things we don't know about how these cartridges work. The game doesn't tell us a lot about them after all. Going back to Skif's experience with the pod, we could see that Strider's condition looked a lot like a mind prison, since his consciousness was stuck alone in the noosphere. But this is in line with what the representative had described. According to C Consciousness, this state is only a result of the failed 2019 Caribbean experiment, and it can be repaired via The Shining. Another detail I noticed is a strange radio signal that can be picked up in Lab X15 shortly before reaching the pod.
Cold. Dark. Can't see anything.
This unknown voice remains unexplained, but my theory is that it could come from someone's consciousness trapped within the noosphere. If that's the case, it implies that afterlife in the form of subtle matter is quite terrifying, due to the fact that every individual image has been isolated. Imagine your mind stuck alone in complete darkness for all eternity after the death of your physical body. That's why fixing this via The Shining is the most important thing for all those who believe it to be true. Indeed, afterlife in the noosphere being a mind prison doesn't mean subtle matter is not real. But a completely different way to look at it is as a full-on deception, a simple Psi illusion, courtesy of C Consciousness. Depending on your actions as the player, Skif will have different ways to interpret the situation. If Skif wasn't convinced by his experiences with subtle matter, this is what he will conclude on the case.
What's left in the noosphere is just an imprint of consciousness, a copy, a collection of a person's memories. I saw a projection of Strider. It was just a copy. Not the man I once knew. Strider's dead. The representative is either an illusion or a Psi imprint of someone who was once alive.
Strelok thinks there's a machine deep within Pripyat controlling these illusions. Sounds way more plausible than some kind of noosphere subtle matter.
In this case, investigating subtle matter further becomes impossible, because the path taken by our hero won't provide any more interesting data on the topic. That's why, for the remainder of the video, we will focus on what happens if Skif chooses to believe in the Shining Zone.
Everything the representative said is true. Subtle matter the Shining Zone, immortality within the noosphere. It's all real. I talked to Strider. He's alive, Dahlia, alive. With no physical body.
It was him. He's alive in the noosphere. Alone and trapped, but alive. And so are the others. The Shining will set them free.
After restarting the heart of the X network at the Foundation, the representative will appear once again. At first, he will ignore Dimitro's attempts to communicate with him and simply deliver his lines in a monotone way, a behavior that implies he might actually be a program, like Colonel Korshunov had predicted. This angered Dimitro greatly, prompting him to try to remove and destroy the control unit. However, in the spark path, the representative will suddenly come to his senses and finally answer his son's question.
Dig deeper, darling. Dig deeper, son.
This is followed by a long conversation between Valentin Dahlia and Skif, where the representative answers the stalker's questions. Here, he acts and talks very much like a human being, and gives such explanations that it is hard to believe he might just be a program or an illusion. Indeed, the plan to bring the Shining to the Zone and the rest of the world could only have been made by C consciousness after S.T.A.L.K.E.R gunned down their bodies, because that's when they realized that subtle matter is supposedly real, since their existence persisted within the noosphere. Moreover, the plan took into consideration events that only occurred after 2012, such as the arrival of the Warden S.T.A.L.K.E.R, SCAR's reframing using Marshall's memories, the failed second Caribbean experiment, and so on. This proves at the very least that what survived of C consciousness isn't a stale copy of their subtle images, but an entity that is able to understand what happens around it, endowed with critical thinking, and whose actions can have real impact on the physical world. Now, it could be that C consciousness is a special case, due to the fact that they already had a peculiar connection with the noosphere prior to the demise of their bodies. The examples we saw from regular people like Topol and Strider didn't display as much qualities, but it could be due to the fact that their subtle matter images were isolated within the information field. Overall, I think this second encounter with the representative rules out the idea of subtle matter being a complete deception. However, it doesn't prove that the Shining is real either, and there are in fact a few elements that hint at something being wrong with the representative. Firstly, there was the delay in his response to Dmitro, as if the connection needed some time to be properly established. Such a delay did not happen when Skif used the visiograph in X-17, but the representative's hologram did not move at the beginning, even though it had started to talk. This could be a bug, but other such mistakes in lip-syncing of characters during cutscenes were quickly fixed after release, while the static nature of the representative remains up to the current version of the game. So who knows what it really means. Another detail about Valentin Dahlia is the fact that he clearly looks different during both cutscenes, though this is something he explained himself.
The last time you conversed with a representative of C consciousness, it was comprised of all its members. Thanks to your assistance, I can finally speak for myself.
So, in Malachite, the image we saw of the representative was a merging of all the members of C consciousness, while at the Foundation, the face we see is Valentin's only. However, this kinda contradicts something else he said earlier.
Regardless of S.T.A.L.K.E.R's intentions, any efforts to revive us would have been futile, because the merging of our minds is irreversible.
These are minor inconsistencies that could not mean anything, but they add up to create a small doubt that perhaps subtle matter is not exactly what we think. Thus, we need to investigate further, looking at what happens to Skif in the Dead Valley. Indeed, the representative promised him miracles. Then, lo and behold, Richter will show up to help Skif, the same Richter who died previously while fighting Korshunov. Somehow, the subtle matter image of Richter manifests in the Dead Valley and guides our protagonist across the dangerous areas, showing him the correct way through unstable emissions and murky waters. Moreover, other characters that Skif had met during his journey will also be found along this path, in two different spots. The first is a small underground area, where the spirits have gathered around a campfire. In my playthrough, I found Foma, who fell when he tried to kill our hero at Azimuth Station. Varan, the bandit leader who bit more than he could chew. Captain Zotov, who sacrificed himself during the ward assault on the Doga. The second place is a special subtle matter campfire under a platform, surrounded by beautiful flowers and butterflies, reminiscent of the Shining Zone. Here I met with Lodochka, the professor who lost everything along with Noontide, Dvupalov, creator of Faust, and Panas Shun, a digger from garbage. Unlike the previous three, we didn't learn how these guys died, and perhaps they are actually still alive, and these phantoms are simply what the noosphere holds of them at this moment. This could be why they are translucent, though Richter did die, and he's also the same, so I'm not sure. Besides, it seems that depending on your actions as a player, it might be possible to find other characters here, so let me know who you found in your playthrough in the comments below. In any case, these ghosts don't have much interaction with Skif, only able to utter basic lines, and the same can be said about the spirit of Richter too. This begs the question, is this actually real, or a psi hallucination caused by the strong emissions present in the Dead Valley? Ever since Shadow of Chernobyl, it was established that the center of the zone is a place of powerful psychotropic forces. During the rush that followed the deactivation of the Brain Scorcher and other psi fields, many stalkers experienced these effects, and the closer they got to the Dead Valley, the stronger the illusions got. However, when we travel through the Dead Valley in the Ward Run, Skif will not witness anything of the sort. Perhaps these phantoms only appear to those who believe in the Shining, or they are in fact real, representing the subtle matter images of those who died in the zone. In any case, the last piece of evidence we need to take a look at is the spark ending itself, where the Shining is finally realized. After Scar stepped in the pod to serve as a mediator for sea consciousness, Skif woke up in the Shining Zone, close to Zalesia. The poppy field extended all the way to the village, where a group of sparkers were waiting. Richter and Scar, of course, but also Star, who gave his life at the Duga, Spirit, who fell while looking for a way into Limansk, and Mugwort, who was still alive at the end of the game. At first glance, it looks like the plan succeeded. Both the dead and the living have been reunited in the Shining Zone in the form of subtle matter. Yet I thought everyone was supposed to be connected via the Shining, not just these 6 people. What about the others? Besides, even if Skif's consciousness joined the group, it turns out that his physical body is still in the zone, left alone among a gruesome scene of carnage. It is unknown why many cadavers litter the floor around him, but this site heavily suggests that something went terribly wrong with The Shining, and everything is not as great as it seems. Overall, the meaning of this scene can be interpreted in many ways, and this video is not aimed at analyzing the ending, so I won't dive deeper into it for the time being. But there is one thing I want to take away from this. When S.T.A.L.K.E.R stepped into the pod, something did happen. Considering S.T.A.L.K.E.R is just a mediator and cannot connect to the noosphere by himself, this can only mean one thing. C consciousness, or at least what's left of it, did in fact make a change in the noosphere using S.T.A.L.K.E.'s ability as a mediator. Which means that there is something left of C consciousness capable of doing that, and thus subtle matter has to be real in some capacity. If it wasn't, there would be nobody left to make what Skif experienced in the final cutscene. Due to the fact that subtle matter has been a topic of discussion among fans for a long time, many theories have appeared about it, ranging from a complete psi-illusion to a real zone miracle. If I had to give my opinion, given everything we've established so far, I would say that subtle matter does indeed exist, but perhaps not exactly in the way S.T.A.L.K.E.R anticipated. I don't think it could simply be an illusion. There's too much evidence to prove otherwise, although I don't believe it to be a true afterlife in the noosphere either. Therefore, the idea that what remains in the noosphere is a copy of someone's psi-signature that is still able to evolve and react to events around it, mind you, is quite appealing to me. I like to think of it as a backup file of someone's consciousness. When the person dies, the original copy is destroyed, but the backup is restored and goes on in the noosphere. Could this be considered eternal life? I am not qualified to say, though I would love to read about your thoughts and interpretations of subtle matter in the comments below. I should mention that the conclusions I came to are only possible if you consider that every choice in the game remains coherent within the story. In other words, things would have gone exactly this way if Skif made the same choices, and every ending was possible from the start. I say this because there is the theory that only one path is canon, and what happens in the others should not be taken into account when analyzing the lore due to the fact that they never really happened in the first place. This also ties into the idea that the game changes its narrative depending on what the player chooses to believe. For example, if you go for the spark path, then subtle matter will be real, but if you take the ward path, it will be a deception, and both are true in their own rights. So far, I haven't applied such an approach in any of my videos, since we do not yet know the true ending of the game, but I think it is important to highlight the fact that this method exists and could drastically change the way you look at subtle matter. Regardless, it is obvious that there are still a lot of things we don't know, and the developers left the mystery of subtle matter open for the players to try to wrap their heads around. I hope I gave enough information in this video for you to make your own opinion on the topic. Let me know if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Good hunting, stalkers.